Hey, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome back to San Bernardino Zoo, where today I've got a question for you. What is the biggest habitat you've ever built? Well, this is the biggest habitat that I've ever built, the Cheetah Conservation Centre at Tekton Zoo. It is 3,500 square meters, but today we need to build something even bigger. We are back in Africa and we're going to be building a huge habitat for the hippopotamus. These two boxes here are the size of the habitat that we need, the minimum size that is. It's going to need to be at least 4,000 square meters. I've split the boxes up so we've got a more manageable shape to work with. We've got lots of work to do today. Let's get building. Alright, this habitat is going to be called Hippo Falls. It's going to feature a river, a lake, a huge set of waterfalls and 3 different viewing galleries for the guests. And it's going to sit just below the African forest that we just finished. So the first thing that we need to do is build up the terrain here. I want this to be kind of halfway between the height of the forest and the height of the savannah exhibit, and the guests will be able to see from here down into Hippo Falls and across to the savannah that will come later. I've never built for hippos before in Planet Zoo, and if you haven't either, let me tell you, it is an absolute nightmare. I'm so happy with how this habitat turned out in the end, but the journey there took a very long time. I'm laying some terrain in here so we can get a path down, and that is one of the reasons this habitat was so difficult. It is all about paths, water and barriers together, and those 3 things do not combine easily. So what I want is a viewing gallery on the path that we're on now that's going to give guests a view across the lake and the river and enable them to see the hippos when they're in the water from up close. Another viewing gallery further down the path which gives underwater viewing of the hippos, and then a 3rd viewing gallery at the end of the path which gives guests a view of the hippos on land. So lots of work to do. We'll get onto the logistics of it in a bit, but firstly we need to make the waterfalls. So I made some waterfalls in the gorilla habitat a couple of weeks ago, so we're not going to dwell too long on here. These are going to be very different. They're going to be huge and they're going to be on 2 levels. So we're going to use a mixture of rocks and the stalactite pieces to get a nice natural look whilst keeping it within the realms of what you'd see in a real zoo. Obviously the zoo wasn't just built with an amazing waterfall sat in the middle of it. They've had to build the waterfall as well, so we don't want it to look completely natural, but just like something that's had a lot of money spent on it. The main inspirations for this habitat were Disney's Animal Kingdom and the hippo habitat at Cincinnati Zoo, which has the most incredible viewing gallery, which we will be replicating. So almost done with the waterfalls, just going to use some of the special effects pieces as well as the waterfalls themselves to get a nice cohesive look to it. And then we'll copy it up and put a second tier in as well. And then once I've done some more detailing with vines and things like that, we're going to copy loads of these waterfalls across and really fill in the back of the habitat like you see here. Moving on to the main body of water for the hippos, I want it to be shallower at one end than it is at the other, so that sometimes when the hippos are in the water you can still see quite a lot of them, and then sometimes they're completely submerged. So this area here will be the deepest part, and where our little angry vendor is there, we're going to have the underwater viewing window. So we'll get the water to the right depth here, and then away up the other end here we're going to draw in a nice smooth curve that takes us from one level down to the other, and then just use the flatten to surface tool to copy that across to the rest of this area and dig out all the water, and then we'll move on to getting some barriers in. So these barriers that we're building here will actually be proper glass barriers that are going to hold the water here and provide the underwater viewing window, and then I'm going to draw in the rest of the habitat with them as well, like you can see here. That is all the water that we need, and yes, there's quite a lot of it. It's about 2,000 square meters here. I want a pair of hippos with enough room for them to breed as well. Eventually we will be removing almost all the glass using null barriers and just keeping the glass in at the front for the underwater viewing window. I realised at this point that I'm going to need the water to be lower if we're going to get a viewing gallery in that actually overhangs the water, which is what I want. So we'll quickly adjust the gradient that I put in before and then get the water back in, and then we can move on to building the first viewing gallery. Now this is where the trouble really starts. I've cut out so much pathing footage from this video, but basically we're going to have this viewing gallery here overhanging the water, so we need to get the paths in and high enough above the water for them to work. And I'll put the habitat gate in here so we can see how much water we have here and make sure that we've got enough water and enough land. We need about 1,800 meters of both, so you can see we should be well covered for that. And then we'll go back to the pathing, and this time we're going to get the underwater viewing gallery in. So we've got these paths running alongside the barrier here, that's not too difficult, but then we need to join them up to this path up here in something that isn't going to be too steep and isn't going to cause our guests risk of injury. So it's probably about 20 minutes edited out of that there. But finally we get there on one side, and then we can join this up here on the other side, because this path is going to continue on up to the viewing gallery next to this piece of land here, which will be the Hippo's main land area. I've been using the natural paths for all of the paths in this habitat because I like the nice neutral colour, but I do not like the bright white curb on them. That's not going anywhere near this habitat, so we need to cover that up for every path. So for the first viewing gallery back here, I'm going to be using concrete. It needs to be not floating above the water anyway, so these concrete blocks are going to make it look nice and solid and also cover up the curb like you can see here. And then we'll move on to the walls. So I thought it was about time our mud walls got a little bit of a makeover. We've been using these a lot around the zoo, and I want to try and make them look now like the ones they have in Animal Kingdom, which have a lot more colour to them. So what we're going to do is take the lower parts of it here and make them brighter, and then we're going to make the top a little darker, and then introduce some new elements in the middle with a colour sort of between the two of them, so we get a nice sort of gradient effect of the colours here, with a darker sort of rock colour at the top and more of a sun bleached colour down the bottom. So we'll recolour some of the pieces and then sink them in a little bit so that we can control where that colour appears. We'll get this sort of 3 colour effect once we're done, with a nice gradient between them. We'll leave the roots in there as well. I like that addition to them. I think that makes them more interesting. And yeah, just keep mucking around with it until we're happy with the way that it looks, and then we can introduce this to the habitat. I'm going to mix these ones with the ones that we've used elsewhere as well, depending on where I want them to be brighter and where I want them to sink into the background a bit more. Okay, on to the viewing gallery. This is the one based on Cincinnati Zoo, and it had a feature I absolutely loved, which I was desperate to try and replicate, and I worked out the best way to do it is probably the simplest. It has Hippo's footprints all the way along the viewing gallery imprinted into the concrete. Now, without using a billion pieces and possibly more skill than I've got, there's no way to imprint them, but I realized if we turn the Hippo statue upside down and then just poke his feet through, then we can have Hippo's footprints going along this viewing gallery. It is such a cute kind of look. It's not something I've seen before in Planet Zoo, and I really like the way it looks. I think it's a really unique feature that really elevates the viewing gallery. So we'll arrange those so it looks like the hippo has walked across the concrete, and then it's off to the islands to grab, well, an island to bring it back to this habitat, because we want a little island in the middle of the lake, and we're going to put one of the mud baths on there so that the hippos can wallow about in the mud right in front of the first viewing gallery for the guests. Now, I got so many comments on the last episode about how I work terrain around these mud baths. I thought I'd make it today's Franchise Masters, so let's take a look. If you want complete freedom in editing terrain in Planet Zoo, all you need to do is go to the menu in the top right, go to settings and then game, and then you just need to make sure that you have these options selected: disable scenery collision, track collision, terrain collision, and animal navigation terrain constraints. And now you can do things like this: drop a mud bath or any enrichment item down anywhere that you want it in your zoo, and in the terrain options we go to pull, turn the intensity down to about 30%, something like that, and then we can just draw around this mud bath until we've got a completely natural looking mud bath, just looking like a little puddle in the middle of the terrain rather than an item. You can do that with all sorts of things, so if you find it useful, let's get back to the build. Alright, so we're going to use some of these fake rocks to create the floor of the island. We're only going to be able to see the top of them here, so we'll just use one rock and copy that in maybe 4 times and get this all covered up. We'll sort out the colours later as well, make it look a lot more natural than this, although most of it will be covered with the mud bath anyway. And then we'll move on to the path down to the underwater viewing gallery and start getting that looking good. So firstly, we need to cover up these path edges again. We're just going to use one rock, copy it loads of times to do that. This will be covered up by our new mud walls anyway. We don't want this bit of glass you can see to the left of the path to be visible. That will be completely covered up by the mud walls. And then the next piece of glass is where the actual viewing gallery is going to go. So the roof of this viewing gallery is one of the more complex parts of the build. It's made of interleaving wooden struts which go diagonally across each other on 2 different levels. It's got a really nice subtle look from above, and then a really interesting look when you're actually in there. So we've got these dark wood slats going diagonally to the right as you look at this on top. And then underneath them will be light wood slats going in the other direction. And we've also got to get this to curve around this glass. There's no kind of quick way of doing this. Firstly, we're going to fill this with these slats, and then we're going to delete every second one. And that way we get gaps in between them that are exactly the right size and everything looks nice and even like so. And then we can copy these pieces of wood up, rotate them around in the opposite direction, recolor them so that we got some nice light wood here, and then we can start moving them back into position so that everything is lined up perfectly with this piece of metal here that's actually attaching it all to the glass. That's the first bit done. There's a lot more work to do to get this to go all the way to the back of the viewing gallery, provide a nice enclosed yet open space for the guests. I've extended the wood out so that it fills it nicely, and then we can start copying it across. Now the problem is we can't rotate it to match the rotation of the glass, because then the wooden slats aren't going to be perpendicular anymore. So what we have to do is just rotate the metal piece at the end once we get it into a separate group, and then for each time we copy it we need to add more wood in, a slightly different amount for each set of slats, until it's joined up to the metal at the top again, like so. Took a while, but I really like the final effect. We'll drop a few trees in as well, and we'll add some more decorations to it later. Back at the first viewing gallery, we do not want our guests getting into the water with the hippos, because it'll probably be the last thing they ever do. So we're going to add a second level to it down here, fill this in with a few concrete blocks, and then some vegetation to make it look nice, and just make sure that there's a sort of safety feature down there. And then we're going to use a modified version of the viewing gallery roof from Gorilla Mountain as the roof for this viewing gallery, so we get a nice bit of continuity between the two exhibits. We just need to make it a little bit larger so it fits nicely over this viewing gallery and gives some shade to the guests. We're also going to drop in the wooden floor from the Gorilla viewing gallery, because I really like this. I think it looks really nice and it'll work really well here as well. Take a bit of adjustments to get it to fit this semicircular viewing gallery rather than a rectangular original one. And then we're going to move on and do something new. So back in the other viewing gallery, we're going to make a gnarly looking tree to hold up the roof. So we're going to be using some of the bristlecone pine branches, which look really cool. They're so twisted, and this one in particular is a bit thinner and a bit more generic looking than the others. So rather than looking like a bit of a bristlecone pine, gives you more of a sort of generic look, which I think will look really cool in that viewing gallery. Now this slope here that's covered in vegetation looks really nice, but it'd be really easy for a hippo to just walk up there, bust through the fence and get out. So we're going to put something in that a lot of zoos have, bollards. They don't have to be very high, and they don't have to be very close together. Hippos aren't big jumpers, and they're kind of wide, so these will work nicely. And then we're going to move on and start making the inside of this habitat look as nice as the outside. So we'll start with this little outcrop of land here, which lies in between the waterfall and the hippo's main large land area. And we'll start using scaevola bushes and some of the African jungle plants to make this look really nice. You can see the little gap at the back there, which is where the habitat ends, and then the remains of that brown wooden box there, which is where the hippo's indoor quarters is going to be. So we want to block as much of the view of that as possible. There's going to be a lot of land and water in this building, and we don't want it dominating the habitat, and that gives us the freedom to have less land and less water in the guest-facing part of the habitat to make the outside parts look the way that we want them to look, rather than the way that the game is forcing us to do it. If you're enjoying this video, by the way, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more. It really helps our channel out. Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. And let's add some foliage into the viewing galleries themselves as well. We'll get some ferns and stuff up on top of these tree trunks. Just drop a bit of mulch in there so it's got somewhere to grow from. We're not going to have this high, we'll have it like this so it just looks like a really big low-lying fern. And then we'll move on to the massive building that we need to put in here. So, you know, we're not huge on backstage in this zoo. Try to do as little as possible of that if it can't be seen by the guests. But this is unavoidable. We need something huge to take up half of the land and water space, or almost half, that we need for these hippos to keep them happy. And with it being this big, we need to actually do it properly. The first thing we're going to do is create a single grid piece of wall that we can use to make the building. Now, a lot of this at the front is going to be covered up with our new mud walls, but the sides and the back will be visible from various parts of the zoo, I'm sure, so we need to do it properly. So what I'm going to do first of all is make a kind of slightly brutalist style concrete wall, using the same technique we used for the viewing gallery roofs, where we fill it with these concrete pillars and then we delete half of them, so we get a nice kind of corrugated effect. Gives us a really interesting texture on the building like that. And then we will start putting a roof in as well. So a little ledge at the top of the roof, and this ledge is going to hold in a bio roof. We're going to use the grass panels to create a bio roof and then cover it in various grasses and flowers, so it looks really cool from up above. And once we've got one section of this built, we can then copy this as many times as we need to make the building. So we'll get these grass panels across here, and you can see there's a really sort of defined line between them, which I really don't like. So once we've got as far back as we need to go, then we'll copy them again off the grid so that we can get them to fill in most of those gaps. And then back on the grid, we'll copy it across here, get to where we need to, and then rotate a piece and copy that across to cover up the water area at the back. We're going to end up with quite an interesting shape to this building, so it's not just one giant rectangle. This is going to be very visible from aerial shots of the view, so we want to make sure it looks as good as possible. So it looks a bit copy-pasted at the moment, but once we get the flowers and grasses in there, it's really going to come to life. A little bit of work to make sure that everything looks correct going all the way around it. We're going to incorporate a keeper hut in here as well, so that the keeper doesn't have too far to walk. We'll tidy up the door, and then we'll get onto the grasses. So I'm just going to basically spam these as randomly as possible, using all sorts of different type of grass until we get something that I'm happy with. Now, I'm not going to show you building the inside of this. It's going to be quite similar to the gorillas inside, lots of concrete and plaster. I will show you it at the end in the cinematics. The actual build of it is fairly basic. I'm going to keep it as bare bones as possible in there to make sure the hippos spend as much time as possible in the outside viewable areas of the habitat. And there's going to be very little in there apart from a bit of straw and the water franchise mode requires us to put in there. Time to put in the mud bath that we spoke about earlier. Now, for once, we don't have any terrain to cover this up with because it's in the middle of all this water. So what we're going to do is use the savanna rocks to blend it in nicely with the stalactites that make up the side of the island. We're going to drop a herb scent marker underwater next to the viewing gallery to see if that attracts the hippos there. No idea if that works or not, we'll find out. And then we'll move on to a bit of rock work and all the planting. With a habitat of this size, we need to make sure we get some colour in there somewhere. So a splash of colour from those reeds, bit more from these dog rose bushes, so it's not 100% green and brown. And then we're gonna finally, for the first time in this zoo, use one of my favorite trees, the acacia. I absolutely love how these trees look, and I've not got to use them yet, so happy we can get these into here. And then we're going to start putting our new rock walls in front of the building so that it sort of sinks away into the background, and the only part really visible is the archway that the hippos will come out of. Get a little glimpse of what the inside looks like there, but like I say, I'll show you it properly at the end of the video. And then we are going to put grass all the way around the margins of this habitat, as much as we can get it, just slightly sunk into the ground because it looks a lot more realistic than the long grass that you can paint in yourself. And now we've only got 2 more things to do and the habitat is complete. The first thing that we're going to do is add some rocks to the underwater part. Next to the viewing gallery, we'll be putting real rocks in like this, and making sure they come right up to the glass. That looks really cool. And then a bit further away, we can just paint in the rough rock texture. You're not going to be able to tell the difference in the viewing gallery. That'll save us a few pieces and a bit of time. And then the last thing that we're going to do is add walls to the back of the viewing galleries. And that is this enormous habitat. Finally done. Let's check it out. Phew, I'm exhausted just from doing the voiceover, let alone the build, but how good does this viewing gallery look? This is the top viewing gallery. There, our first hippo goes straight into the water. I love their little tippy-tap runs. That's so funny. Here's a close-up. You can see the first viewing gallery in the background. Let's head up there now and see the view from there. So here we got both our hippos in the water. This one is coming around to the underwater section. We'll move on down to the underwater viewing gallery, see what the view looks like from there. Really happy with this. The footprints are so cute and it's such a good view of the hippo as it comes in. It was definitely worth the pain of all the barriers and paths being combined together, because once we open Africa to the public and we can get our guests down here, it's going to look really good. Now this coming up is probably one of my favourite cinematics I've ever taken, I think. I love the way the light plays on the glass there. We're just going to watch one of our hippos make their way into their indoor shelter. I promised you I'd show you that. So once she's inside, we will take a look at it. Here we go. But it's pretty utilitarian, like I said, but we need loads and loads of space in here to meet the franchise mode land and water requirements, so I can't fill this with items or anything like that, but I've put as much detail as possible on the walls and stuff to make it look good. Let's jump up into the drone cam and see how far we've come today. This is where we were at the start of the episode with Gorilla Mountain as the latest build, and this is where we are now. Wow, that is a lot of building in one episode. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Let's take a quick look at the members board and our latest members of the Explorers Club. Thank you so much for joining. I will see you again next week, where we are going to be opening the Africa area to the public with a new build to join it to the rest of the zoo. Thanks for watching. Bye.